There are two versions of every mother's life, the version before her child is broken and the version she is forced to build after. I know the exact moment my after began. I can tell you the day, the hour, the quality of light coming through the kitchen window. I can tell you what song was playing on the radio and what I had just taken out of the oven and how the smell of it, something warm and ordinary and completely oblivious to what was about to walk through my front door, still turns my stomach when I encounter it now. Thought it was a Wednesday afternoon in early November. The sky over our neighborhood in Fairfax, Virginia, had that particular shade of gray that only appears in the weeks before Thanksgiving. Not stormy, not dramatic, just tired, exhausted, like the sky itself had given up pretending the season was anything other than what it was. My daughter came home at 3:47 p.m. I know the time because I looked at the clock on the microwave when I heard the door. She was 17 minutes later than usual. I didn't think anything of it. Not yet. She came through the front door the way teenagers do, shoes off, backpack dropped, the particular choreography of a girl who had walked this same route so many times it had become muscle memory. I called out from the kitchen. She didn't answer. I assumed she had her earbuds in. I was wrong. She walked past the kitchen doorway without stopping, without looking at me, without the casual, half-distracted, "Hey, Mom," that I had come to rely on the way you rely on small constants, the newspaper on the porch, the coffee maker that always starts too loud, the sounds that tell you the world is still in its expected shape. I followed her into the hallway. Lily, she was already at the top of the stairs, and for just a fraction of a second, before she turned the corner toward her room, I saw her face in profile. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry, but the particular dryness of someone who has used up every tear they had hours ago and is now operating on something hollow and automatic. My daughter's name is Lily Catherine Mercer. She is 17 years old. She has her father's eyes, gray and steady and deeply, quietly perceptive, and my stubbornness, which she has never once thanked me for, even though it has saved her more times than she knows. She runs cross-country. She edits the school literary magazine. She argues about books with a ferocity that makes her English teacher both terrified and secretly delighted. She has wanted to study law since she was 11 years old because she once told me with the particular certainty of a child who has not yet learned to doubt herself. She believes that justice is the most important thing in the world. She believes in justice. She believes in it the way children of soldiers sometimes do, with a precision, a seriousness, a bone-deep understanding that justice is not automatic, that it has to be built, that someone has to be willing to stand in its defense. Even when standing is the most costly thing they can choose. She learned that from her father. Her father, Colonel James Mercer. Except that Colonel was no longer accurate. It hadn't been for 2 years, since the promotion that moved him from the field commands he loved into the kind of strategic authority that meant his name appeared in briefings that very few people were ever cleared to read. General James Mercer, United States Army, 4-star, 34 years of service, 2 combat deployments in the Middle East, 1 in Eastern Europe. A man whose professional biography contained the kind of decisions that altered the shape of things at a level most people never see and never know to look for. He was currently stationed at the Pentagon, but traveling constantly, the particular kind of perpetually in transit that means you are never fully anywhere, never fully home, always in the halfway space between duty and the life you love and cannot get back to as often as you should. He called every night at 8 p.m., without exception, from wherever he was in the world, in whatever time zone, and whatever level of operational pressure. He called at 8 p.m. to talk to Lily for 20 minutes. It was the one thing he had never once broken. In 17 years of being her father, he didn't know what had happened to her. Neither did I yet. But standing in my hallway at 3:51 p.m. on a Wednesday in November, listening to the sound of my daughter's bedroom door close upstairs, not slammed, not thrown, just quietly, carefully shut, which was somehow worse than either. I felt the specific cold that moves through a mother when something in her body understands what her mind hasn't caught. Up to yet, something had happened to my daughter. I gave her an hour. I finished dinner, mechanically, automatically, with the particular efficiency of a woman who has learned over 20 years of military marriage to function through uncertainty. I set the table. I folded laundry. I responded to 2 emails from my own office that I would not be able to recall the content of the following morning at 4:52 p.m. I walked upstairs and knocked on Lily's door. Silence. Lily, I'm not going away. A pause, long enough that I raised my hand to knock again. Then, I'm tired, Mom. I know you are. I kept my voice even, steady. The voice I had developed over years of being the parent who was always here. Always the one holding the daily shape of our life together while James held the larger, more public things. Open the door, please. Another pause. The door opened. She had changed into sweatpants and a worn cross-country hoodie, the gray one with Mercer printed on the back that she'd had since sophomore year. She looked younger in it, smaller. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded across her chest and her eyes looking at a point approximately 6 inches to the left of my face. The way she had done since she was small when she was trying not to cry. She was trying very hard not to cry. I didn't say anything. I stepped forward and put my arms around her. And she held for approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds of rigid resistance, of a 17-year-old girl trying desperately to hold herself together, and then she came apart completely. She didn't make sound at first, just shook. The kind of crying that has been compressed for so long that when it finally breaks through, it's almost entirely internal. Just shaking and shaking while I held her and said nothing and rubbed slow circles on her back the way I had done when she was 2 years old and the world was too loud and she needed to remember she was safe. Talk to me, I said, when the shaking slowed. Take your time, but talk to me. We sat on her bed. Her phone was face down on her desk. She hadn't looked at it once since she'd been home, I realized. For a 17-year-old girl in this decade, that alone told me everything about the severity of whatever had happened. She told me it took 40 minutes. There were long pauses. She circled around certain details, approached them, retreated, tried again. I didn't push. I just listened with the particular quality of listening that is its own kind of action, fully present, fully still, taking everything in and letting none of my reaction show on my face until I understood the whole shape of it. This is what I understood by the end. 3 weeks ago, a group of boys at her school had decided that Lily Mercer was a problem worth solving, not because she had done anything to them, not because of any conflict or history or misunderstanding, but because she was exactly the kind of person that a certain type of boy finds genuinely, viscerally threatening, too confident, too intelligent, too willing to hold her ground in the conversations and debates and small daily power negotiations that define social life at 17. Too unwilling to make herself smaller to accommodate their comfort. Boys like that don't negotiate. They dismantle. The group had 4 members. They called themselves nothing. Groups like this never do, because naming themselves would require a self-awareness they fundamentally lack. But everyone at Jefferson Preparatory Academy in Fairfax, Virginia, knew who they were and what it meant to be noticed by them. The leader was a boy named Braden Cole, 18 years old, 6'2". The kind of attractive that comes from excellent nutrition and expensive orthodontics and the particular glow of someone who has never once gone without anything they wanted. His father was Senator Douglas Cole, Republican, Virginia, third term, currently serving on the Senate Armed Services Committee and widely described in political coverage as a rising force in defense policy circles. Braden. Cole had grown up watching his father command rooms. He had absorbed, through nothing more than proximity and repetition, the understanding that power is the only language that matters, and that the people who have it are under no obligation to explain themselves to the people who don't. He had 3 associates who operated in his orbit with the specific loyalty of boys who have calculated correctly that proximity to the powerful is the next best thing to being powerful yourself. Their names were Chase, Donovan, and Tyler. Their fathers were, respectively, a federal judge, a real estate developer whose firm managed 17 commercial properties across Northern Virginia, and a network news anchor whose face appeared on screens across the country every evening at 6-30 dot. These were boys who had grown up understanding, at a cellular level, that consequences were for other people. Lily had made the mistake, if that is the right word for something that was entirely their failure and not hers at all, of disagreeing with Braden Cole in front of an audience. It was in a P government class, 3 weeks before the Wednesday she came home broken. They had been discussing constitutional limits on executive power, a subject Lily had studied independently, outside of the curriculum, because she was the kind of student who reads ahead, not because she has to, but because she genuinely cannot stop herself. She had contradicted something Braden said, politely, with evidence, in front of 23 of their peers and a teacher who, to his lasting discredit, said nothing when Braden's expression shifted into something cold and deliberate and recognizable. To anyone who understood what it meant, he had smiled at her. A specific kind of smile, the kind that means, I will remember this. The escalation was methodical. Looking back now, I can see the architecture of it, the way it built, deliberately, and with clear intention, from the barely perceptible to the catastrophic. The small things first. A comment in the hallway about her scholarship. She had qualified for Jefferson Prep's academic merit program, which Braden Cole apparently found both laughable and offensive, the way those who have never earned anything sometimes find merit quietly enraging. Whispers in the corridor that stopped when she walked into range. A message in the class group chat, something technically innocuous, designed to humiliate without providing anything that could be pointed to directly in a complaint. Lily ignored it, because Lily had been raised to handle difficulty with her. Spine straight and her expression neutral and her focus fixed on what actually mattered. She had been told, by a father who had made decisions in conditions of genuine danger, that most of the things that feel like attacks are just noise, and that giving noise your attention is the first and most costly mistake you can make. She was right to do what she did, in the context of ordinary difficulty, but what Braden Cole did next was not ordinary difficulty. 6 days before the Wednesday, she came home, a Friday. Lily had cross-country practice that ran late, and afterwards she had gone to the school's media room, a space the literary magazine editors were allowed to use for layout work, to finish the final edits on that month's issue. She was alone in the room. She had been there for 2 hours. She was exhausted, the kind of exhausted that lives in your muscles and behind your eyes after months of trying to carry too much. And somewhere in the long quiet of that room, surrounded by the soft blue glow of the monitor and the near total silence of an emptied school building, she had put her head down on the desk dot. She was asleep within minutes. She slept for 40 minutes. She didn't know anyone else was in the building. Braden Cole and his 3 associates had stayed late for exactly this purpose. She learned this later from a classmate who had overheard them planning it the day before, who had said nothing because saying something required a courage that most people, when tested, discover they don't quite have enough of. They came into the media room. While she slept, they filmed her, close, deliberate, moving around her while she lay completely unaware. Her cheek against her crossed arms, her hair loose, her face completely unguarded in the way that faces are only ever unguarded in sleep. That profound, specific vulnerability that belongs to the pride itself and to no one else. And then they did something that I have to breathe carefully around even now, months later. In order to continue speaking about it without losing the composure, I need, in order to tell this story correctly, they edited the footage, what they produced in the hours between that Friday evening and the following Monday morning was not what they had filmed. They layered audio over it. They added text. They constructed, with the specific creative cruelty of boys who have grown up literate in social media and its mechanics of humiliation, something designed to make my sleeping daughter look like something she was not. Something designed to make every person who watched it, and they made sure a great many people watched it, see her differently, permanently, in the way that certain images, once seen, cannot be unseen. They posted it Monday morning on 3 different platforms, from accounts specifically created for this purpose, accounts that could not be easily traced back to their real names, set up with a kind of careful anonymity that speaks to premeditation, to planning, to the cold, deliberate choice of people who understand exactly what they're doing and have decided the risk is acceptable. By the time Lily walked into Jefferson Prep on Monday morning, 412 people had seen it. By Wednesday afternoon, when she walked through our front door 17 minutes late and didn't say hello, the number was significantly higher. She had spent 3 days at school knowing. 3 days. Walking those hallways with her face composed and her shoulders back, because she was her father's daughter and she had been taught that you do not let them see you break. 3 days responding to the barely concealed smirks and the loaded silences and one direct comment from Chase, delivered in the cafeteria line with the theatrical casualness of someone performing for an audience that I cannot repeat here, because even now it fills me with a specific white-hot thing that I have to be very careful about. 3 days carrying it alone because she hadn't wanted to worry me, because she knew her father was dealing with things that mattered at a scale she didn't want to compete with, because she was 17 years old and she had inherited, from both of us in different ways, the very specific and very damaging belief that strength means not asking for help. I should have told you sooner, she said at the end. Her voice was flat with exhaustion. I kept thinking I could handle it myself. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. This girl I had built my life around. This person who was the best evidence I had ever encountered that the world contained things genuinely worth protecting. You handled it exactly as long as you should. Have, I said carefully, and now I'm going to handle the rest. She looked at me with those gray eyes, James's eyes, the ones that always seemed to be calculating something, and I saw, for just a fraction of a second, a flicker of something that might have been relief. And then something else, wariness. Mom, don't do anything that's going to Lily. I stood up from her bed. My voice was very calm. It was the calmest I had ever heard it. There are things your father does that I don't ask questions about, and there are things I do that he doesn't ask questions about. This is one of mine. I kissed the top of her head. I went downstairs and I called James. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he had been watching his phone, which told me he already knew, the way he always seemed to know when something in our house had shifted. Some marital sixth sense developed over 2 decades of long distances, and the kind of love that survives absence by becoming extraordinarily attentive to everything it cannot directly observe. Nadia. His voice was measured, quiet, the voice I had first heard 23 years ago, across a crowded event at Fort Bragg, and recognized immediately. As the voice of someone who had learned to keep still at the center of chaos, I told him everything. I was precise, chronological. I gave him every detail I had, in the order I had received it, without softening any of it, because he was a man who made decisions based on accurate information, and the worst thing I could do for Lily, for all of it, was give him anything less than the complete picture. When I finished, there was silence on the line, not the silence of surprise, not the silence of a man overwhelmed by what he's hearing. It was the silence I had encountered a handful of times over the course of our marriage. The silence that lives immediately before a decision that cannot be unmade. The silence of something closing dot when he spoke. His voice had not changed in volume or tone, but something inside it had become absolute. I need you to do something for me, he said. Tell me. I need you to document everything. Every screenshot, every post, every timestamp, every name. I need the school's administration contacts, the district superintendent. I need the names of the boys, and I need their fathers' names, and I need whatever you can find about each of them. I've already started. A pause. And then, for just a fraction of a second, I heard something in his breathing that was not General Mercer making a tactical assessment. It was James. Just James. A father. A man whose daughter had been violated while she slept in what should have been a safe place. How is she? He asked. Holding together, I said. She's scared. She's ashamed, which she has no right to be, but doesn't know that yet. She thinks she should have handled it herself. She handled it the only way she could. That's what I told her. Another pause. I'll be home in 36 hours, he said. Keep the documentation coming. Don't contact the school yet. Don't contact anyone yet. Let me, a brief pause. The infinitesimal hesitation of a man recalibrating. Let me assess the full situation before we move. Cameron, I caught myself. 23 years of military marriage, and I still occasionally use the wrong name in moments of high emotion. James, I know, he said quietly, and he did. He always did. I held the phone against my chest after the call ended. The kitchen was warm. Dinner was on the stove. The ordinary world was continuing with its characteristic indifference to the things that shatter inside it. I took a breath, and then I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started building the most comprehensive document I had ever assembled in my life. I worked until 2 a.m. I found everything. I was systematic in the way that only someone running on the specific fuel of maternal fury can be systematic, focused, relentless, completely impervious to fatigue. I found the posts as screenshotted, them with timestamps before they could be deleted. I found the accounts, the fake ones created for this purpose, which were not as anonymous as Braden Cole apparently believed them to be, because people who have never faced real consequences tend to be sloppier than they realize. I documented the class group chat messages that Lily forwarded me one by one. I found public social media profiles for all 4 boys and screenshotted everything relevant. I noted every comment, every share, every account that had amplified what they posted. I found Senator Douglas Cole's official contact information, his chief of staff's name, his campaign office, address. His committee assignments, the name of the federal judge whose son, Donovan, had filmed my daughter sleeping. The real estate developer, the network anchor. I built a file that was by 2 a.m., 47 pages long. Then I made a separate document, shorter, more carefully worded, the kind of document that does not use emotional language, that does not say my daughter or I felt or this is unacceptable. The kind of document that lists facts, dates, evidence, applicable statutes, potential violations of Virginia state law regarding non-consensual recording and distribution of private media, potential Title X implications at the school level, A clean, precise, devastating record of exactly what had been done and exactly what it constituted. I had not gone to law school, but I had been married to the military for 23 years, and I had learned through sheer proximity to institutions and the people who move through them that the most powerful thing you can put in front of powerful people is not anger. It is documentation. At 2:14 a.m. I sent the complete file to James. At 2:17 a.m. I received a response. 3 words. Thank you. Sleep. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs. Checked on Lily. She was asleep. Finally, genuinely asleep. Her face slack and young against her pillow. Her breathing slow. I stood in her doorway for a moment and looked at her. This girl I had raised through every posting, every move, every school year in a new town, every long stretch without her father, but she had weathered with a resilience that sometimes made my heart ache with how much it had cost her to develop it. She hadn't deserved any of what had happened to her, not 1 second of it. Pulled her door quietly shut, and I went to bed. And for the first time in several days, I slept. James arrived 31 hours later, not 36, 31. I had stopped being surprised by that kind of thing years ago. When James said he would be somewhere, he arrived before his own deadline. It was simply how he was built. He came through the front door at 7:14 a.m. on a Friday in full uniform, which told me something because he had not come home in uniform since the promotion. He normally changed before the drive from the Pentagon. The uniform meant he had not gone to the Pentagon this morning. The uniform meant he had come from somewhere else, something that had already begun while I was sleeping and that had not required him to ask my permission or provide me an explanation. He looked exactly like himself. That was the thing about James. He always looked exactly like himself. Controlled, present, the kind of calm that is not the absence of feeling, but the decision to place feeling somewhere it cannot interfere with function. 34 years in the Army does not give you that quality. You either have it going in or you don't, and the Army simply confirms it. He set his bag down. He looked at me. The documentation was thorough, he said. Better than thorough. I had motivation. Something moved across his face. For just a moment. One of those moments that belong only to the two of us and that I have collected over 23 years like small, irreplaceable objects. Then it was gone. Where is she? He asked. Still asleep. He nodded. Let her sleep. He sat down at the kitchen table. I poured coffee. And then, in the quiet of our kitchen at 7:20 a.m. on a Friday morning, while our daughter slept upstairs, my husband told me what he had already set in motion. I listened. By the time he finished speaking, I understood that Braden Cole and his father and every person in their orbit were about to discover something that people who have spent their lives insulated from accountability rarely discover until it is far too late, that there are different kinds of power in this world, and that they had spent theirs targeting the daughter of a man who had spent 34 years learning exactly how each kind works. Lily came downstairs at 8:30. She stopped at the kitchen doorway when she saw him. For a moment, she just stood there, her father in uniform at our kitchen table, coffee in hand, looking at her with those steady gray eyes that were the exact same eyes she saw in her own mirror every morning. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and walked into his arms. He held her for a long time. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask her to recap what had happened or confirm any detail or perform her pain for him in any way. He just held her, one hand on the back of her head, the way he had held her since she was small enough to carry. When she finally pulled back, she looked up at him. What are you going to do? She asked. James set his coffee cup down carefully. What I've always done, he said. Make sure the right people are held to account. Lily studied him for a moment with the precision of someone who understands the language. of understatement, having been raised in it. Are they going to be okay? She asked. And I knew my daughter, that she was asking this not out of concern for them, but because she needed to hear from this man specifically what justice was going to look like, whether it was going to be proportionate, whether it was going to be real. James looked at her steadily. They're going to be fine, he said. They're going to face every consequence that is appropriate and legal and precisely commensurate with what they chose to do. And that is going to be more than sufficient. Lily nodded slowly, and then she sat down at the table across from her father, poured herself coffee that she was technically not supposed to have on school days, but that neither of us said a word about, and said, "Tell me the plan." James almost smiled. Almost. I have learned over 23 years of being married to a man who operates at the intersection of strategy and consequence, that the most dangerous moment in any conflict is not the beginning. It is not the moment the first shot is fired, or the first line is crossed, or the first act of cruelty is committed. The most dangerous moment is the one that comes after, when the people who cause the damage look at what they have done and decide that nothing is going to happen to them. That moment of decision, that settling into comfort, that belief rooted in every prior experience of their protected, consequence-free lives, that the world will once again arrange itself around their safety, that is the most dangerous moment, because it is the moment they stop being careful. Braden Cole and his father reached that moment faster than I expected, which told me something important about the kind of men they were, not just arrogant, but specifically strategically arrogant. The kind who have been rescued from accountability so many times and so efficiently that they have lost the ability to accurately assess risk. They had been insulated from consequences for so long that the very concept had become theoretical to them, abstract, something that happened to other families, other boys. Not theirs, never theirs. They were about to receive a very comprehensive education. James had told us the plan at the kitchen table that Friday morning. In the precise, unhurried way he communicated everything, no unnecessary words. No emotional inflation, just the clean architecture of what was going to happen and in what order and why. He had already spoken to 3 people before walking through our front door. I did not ask who they were because I understood from 2 decades of this marriage that there were things James handled through channels that existed outside of my knowledge, and that my not knowing them was itself a form of protection for all of us. What I understood was this: the documentation I had compiled had been reviewed, the evidence was solid, and the legal exposure for Braden Cole and his associates was significant and real. Virginia, state law on non-consensual recording, is not ambiguous. The distribution of recorded content created without the subject's knowledge or consent, in a space where the subject had a reasonable expectation of privacy and a school. Media room is exactly such a space, constitutes a criminal violation. The fact that Lily was a minor at the time of the recording added additional layers of potential liability. The fact that the content had been deliberately altered and distributed with clear intent to harm added several more. None of this was James's primary approach. His primary approach was far simpler. He was going to walk into Jefferson Preparatory Academy's administrative offices at 9 a.m. Monday morning in full uniform and have a conversation with the principal, the vice principal, the head of student affairs, and the school district's superintendent, who had been asked, through channels I did not inquire about, to make himself available, and Senator Cole. I had asked that James had looked at me with the specific patience of someone who has spent decades managing people who confuse their own importance with actual power. Senator Cole, he said, sits on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He has been For the past 3 years, a vocal advocate for a particular defense appropriations package that my office has had input on. He is aware of my name. He will be made aware of this situation through appropriate channels before Monday morning. I looked at my husband for a moment. How? I asked. Through someone he respects more than he respects himself, James said. Which narrows the field considerably, but does not eliminate it entirely. Lily, across the table, made a sound that might have been a laugh, the first one I had heard from her in days. Small and brief and fragile, but real. The weekend was strange. Still and strange and held together by the particular tension of people who know something is coming and are simply enduring the hours until it arrives. Lily didn't go online. She had made the decision herself, without any discussion, had simply turned off notifications on every platform and placed her phone face down on her desk with the quiet decisiveness of someone who has identified the source of pain and removed herself from proximity to it. I watched this and felt something complicated, relief, but also a particular grief for the fact that she had to make that choice. That the ordinary digital landscape of a 17-year-old girl's life had been turned into something she needed to protect herself from. She ran on Saturday morning. 6 miles alone through the neighborhood in the gray November cold, earbuds in, face forward. I watched her go from the kitchen window and felt something that is very difficult to articulate. A mixture of pride so profound it was almost painful, and a fury so clean and focused it had long since moved past anything resembling hysteria and settled into something much more useful. James worked. He sat at the desk in his home office with the door partially open, on calls and on his laptop for most of Saturday and Sunday. I brought him coffee at intervals. He thanked me. We did not discuss the specifics of what he was doing because we had long since developed the efficiency of people who trust each other enough not to require a running commentary on every moving part. What I knew was this: by Sunday evening, the shape of what was coming had been determined. The people who needed to be informed had been informed. The documentation had been placed in the right hands. And James Mercer, 4-star General, United States Army, was going to walk into that school on Monday morning carrying 34 years of service and the specific controlled authority of a man who has never once raised his voice to make a room understand that he means exactly what he says. What I did not know, what none of us knew yet, was how comprehensively the school itself was about to fail us. That Monday morning arrived with the kind of cold clarity that November sometimes produces. A bright, hard sky, frost on the cars. The world looking aggressively ordinary in the way it does when it is indifferent to the things happening inside. It thought James was dressed. And downstairs at 7:30 a.m., full dress uniform, every decoration in its correct position. He looked, standing in our kitchen drinking his coffee, the way he always looked in full dress, not intimidating, exactly, because intimidation implies something performative, something chosen for effect. He simply looked like himself, completely and precisely himself, in the most formal version of the identity he had built over 3.5 decades. Lily came downstairs at 7:45. She was in her school uniform. Jefferson Prep required them, with her hair pulled back and her face composed with the careful, deliberate composure of someone who has decided that today they are not going to let anything touch them. She stopped when she saw her father. He looked at her. "You don't have to go today," I said. I had said this the night before as well. I had offered it genuinely, without pressure in either direction. Lily looked at me, then back at her father. "Yes, I do," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it, something that had not been there Wednesday afternoon when she walked through the door in pieces, something that had been rebuilding over the course of the weekend, slowly in the space that opens up when a person realizes they are not alone in what they are facing. James nodded once, like he had expected exactly that answer. "I'll drop you," he said. "I have the 9 a.m. meeting." "You don't need to be present for it." "I know," Lily said. She picked up her bag. "I just want to walk in like normal." James looked at her for just a moment, and I saw something cross his face, something brief and completely unguarded and deeply human that he would have hidden from anyone else in the world. Pride. Just absolute, uncomplicated pride. "Then that's exactly what you'll do," he said. I was not in the meeting. James had not asked me to be, and I had not asked to be included, because we both understood without discussion that my presence would shift the dynamic in ways that were not useful. James operates most effectively when he is the only variable in a room, when the people across from him have only one thing to respond to, one set of signals to read, one source of pressure to manage. I stayed home. I cleaned things that did not need cleaning. I made phone calls I had been putting off. I watched the clock. James called at 11:23 a.m. "Come get lunch," he said. "I'll tell you everything." We sat in a corner booth at a restaurant 3 blocks from the school that we had been to exactly twice before, both times for Lily's end-of-year dinner. It was quiet at this hour, mid-morning, between the breakfast crowd and the lunch rush, and James ordered coffee and nothing else and sat across from me with his hands flat on the table in the way he sat when he was organizing what he needed to say. He told me about the meeting, and as he talked, I felt something I had not fully anticipated. Anger, real, deep, clarifying anger, not at Braden Cole or his father or the boys who had filmed my daughter sleeping. That anger had been present for days and had already transformed into something functional. This was different. This was the anger that arrives when the systems that are supposed to protect people demonstrate calmly and efficiently and with complete indifference. That protection was never really the point. The principal, a man named Dr. Gerald Walsh, who had run Jefferson Prep for 11 years and whose annual letter to parents invariably contained the phrase "community of integrity," had spent the first 12 minutes of the meeting expressing what James described as performed concern. The kind of concern that occupies the same space as actual concern without containing any of its substance. He had used the words "deeply troubled" and taking this very seriously, and our commitment to student welfare in ways that bore a striking resemblance to the language of someone who has had media training and is currently deciding whether this situation warrants deploying it. The superintendent, a man named Richard Okafor, who had been asked to be present through channels that apparently made the request difficult to decline, had said very little in the first portion of the meeting, but had been watching. James, with the careful attention of someone who understands, when they are in a room with a person whose influence exceeds their own, the moment of clarity, the moment James recognized that the school's initial posture was going to be a problem, came approximately 20 minutes into the meeting, when Dr. Walsh introduced a third party James had not been informed would be present. Lawyer, Jefferson Preparatory Academy's legal counsel, had been seated at the conference table before James arrived. Not introduced prominently, not flagged in advance. Simply present, a woman in her mid-40s named Patricia Enniel, from a firm whose name James recognized as one that specialized in institutional liability management. The school had known this meeting was coming. Someone had told them. And their first response, before a single word of discussion, before any expression of genuine accountability, had been to call their lawyers. They had already decided their position before. I walked in, James said, across the lunch table from me. His voice was perfectly controlled. His coffee cup was untouched. Their position is that the incident occurred off school property. The accounts were created and the content was posted from personal devices outside of school hours, and that while they take bullying and harassment seriously, their jurisdiction over student conduct in off-campus digital spaces is, and I'm quoting Patricia Enel directly, legally nuanced and contextually limited. I looked at him. She said that. I said, about content that was filmed inside the school building. The filming occurred inside the school building, James confirmed. Their position is that the distribution occurred outside it, and that the distribution is where the primary harm is located. That's technically arguable, James said. Practically unconscionable, but technically arguable. Which is why they have Patricia Enel and not Gerald Walsh making that point. I sat with this for a moment. I had known intellectually that institutions protect themselves. I had known that schools, like all organizations, have legal interests that sometimes diverge from the interests of the students they nominally exist to serve. I had known these things in the abstract way that people know things they have never directly tested. Sitting across from James in that quiet restaurant, I understood them for the first time in their full, concrete, infuriating reality. What about the boys? I asked. What's the school's position on the boys? James looked at me with the measured patience of someone delivering information they know will be received badly. Pending investigation, he said. Standard procedural language. Number. Action taken. No suspension, no removal from extracurricular activities, no formal notification to the boys or their families that any disciplinary process has been initiated. Dr. Walsh indicated that they need to gather information from all parties before any action can be considered. All parties, I repeated. All parties. I put my coffee cup down. They want to interview Lily. They want to interview Lily, James confirmed, as part of gathering information from all parties. Patricia Enel described it as standard protocol. I thought about my daughter. About the 3 weeks she had carried this alone because she hadn't wanted to cause a problem. About the way she had walked through that door on Wednesday with her face arranged into careful neutrality and her body language trying to take up as little space as possible. About the word ashamed, the specific, devastating wrongness of that word in connection with that girl. And I thought about Gerald Walsh and Patricia Enel in their conference room with their legally nuanced positions, proposing to bring my daughter in and ask her questions about the night she was filmed sleeping by 4 boys who had spent weeks dismantling her as part of gathering information from all parties. No, I said that. James nodded. That was my response as well, he said, worded differently. I asked him how the superintendent had reacted. James was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup slightly on its saucer, a gesture I recognized as the physical equivalent of choosing words carefully. Richard Okafor, he said finally, is not Gerald Walsh. He understood the situation more completely. I believe he was uncomfortable with the school's prepared position before I walked in. I believe Patricia Enel's presence surprised him as well. But he didn't override them. He did not in the meeting. But he asked to speak with me privately afterward for approximately 8 minutes, and what he said in those 8 minutes was considerably more candid than anything said at the table. What did he say? He said that the school's legal exposure on the filming alone is significant, regardless of what happens with the distribution. He said that Patricia Enel's framework is designed to protect the institution in a civil action, not to determine what is right. And he said, James paused, that he was going to do something about it. He did not specify what, or when, or through what mechanism. Do you believe him? James considered this for a moment with the seriousness it deserved. I believe he means what he says, he said. I also believe that institutions move slowly when moving quickly would cost them something. So I am not relying on Richard Okafor as my primary mechanism. What is your primary mechanism? He looked at me across the table. Several of them, he said, moving simultaneously. What I didn't know, what James had not told me yet, over that quiet lunch, because he was still calibrating which information was useful for me to have and which would simply add to the weight I was already carrying, was what had happened. After his conversation with the superintendent, he told me that evening after dinner, when Lily had gone upstairs to do homework and we sat at the kitchen table with the particular silence of two people who are tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, Senator Douglas Cole had called James's office at 10:47 a.m. while James was still in the restaurant with me. James had listened to the message before we ordered. He had not mentioned it. He played it for me now, from his phone on speaker. Sitting at our kitchen table in the quiet house, Senator Cole's voice was exactly what I expected. Deep, measured, with the practiced warmth of career politicians. The kind of warmth that is technically genuine but has been so thoroughly refined by years of public performance that it is impossible to distinguish from technique. General Mercer, Douglas Cole. I understand there's been a situation involving our kids at school, and I want to be the first to say that if Braden had any role in something that caused your daughter distress, that is something I take very seriously. I'd like to find a time to talk, man to man, father to father, about how we can resolve this in a way that's good for everyone. I'm sure we can find some common ground here. I'll have my office reach out to yours about scheduling. I hope Lily is doing well. I listened to the message. Then I listened to the silence after it. Man to man, I said. Father to father, James added. How we can resolve this in a way that's good for everyone, common ground. I looked at my husband. He called you before taking any action against his son, I said. Before speaking to Lily's school. Before doing anything except finding out who you were and deciding he could manage you. Yes, James said. He thinks this is a negotiation. He does. I thought about the 412 people who had seen what his son created on that first morning. The number that had grown significantly since, the comments, the shares, the specific, calculated cruelty of what Braden Cole had built in those hours between Friday evening and Monday morning. I thought about Lily, walking into school that morning with her face composed and her spine straight, doing the bravest thing she had done in her 17 years. What did you say? I asked. James picked up his coffee. Set it down. I haven't responded yet, he said. There are a few things that need to happen first. Tuesday arrived, and with it came the first indication that the situation outside our house was beginning to shift in ways that Braden Cole had not planned for. One of Lily's classmates, a girl named Maya, who ran cross-country with Lily and who had sent her some of the initial screenshots out of solidarity, came to school that morning with something on her phone that she showed. Lily in the hallway before first period. Lily texted me at 7:58. A single message. Mom, someone posted something. I called her immediately. She stepped outside the school's front entrance to talk, her voice low. The particular low voice of someone standing in a public place having a private conversation. What Maya had found was a thread on Twitter, or whatever it was calling itself, that week, posted by an account with a small but engaged following. A student at another school in the district who had heard about what happened through the specific, rapid, ungovernable channels of teenage social networks. The thread was careful. It named no one directly, identified no school, but it described what had happened with an accuracy that made it clear the person writing it had either been told by someone with direct knowledge or had seen the original. Content. The thread had been up for 11 hours. It had been shared 430 times. In the comment section, people were asking for the school's name, I sat in my kitchen and read the thread 3 times. Then I called James. He already knew. Of course, he already knew. Does this help us or hurt us? I asked. Neither yet, he said. It's information in the environment. It moves things faster than I would have chosen. But it is not outside of what I was expecting. Are there legal implications? For the person who posted it, they named no one. They identified nothing specifically. They are protected. And Braden Cole's team, his father's team, are they going to try to identify the person? Probably. And they won't find them, because the account was created specifically for this purpose and has no traceable connection to any real identity. Someone is being careful. I thought about this. About 17-year-olds who had watched what happened to my daughter and made the specific decision to do something about it through the only channels available to them. Who had been careful and deliberate and precise. I thought about justice. About what Lily had said when she was 11, that someone has to be willing to stand in its defense. James, I said. I know, he said. By Wednesday, 1 week exactly. Since Lily had come home broken, the thread had been shared over 2,000 times. Someone, somewhere in that chain of shares, had identified the school. Not in the original thread, in a comment. And from there, it had spread with a particular velocity of information that people feel strongly about. The kind that moves through networks because it makes people feel something that requires expression. Jefferson. Preparatory Academy's main phone line received 47 calls on Wednesday. I know this because Richard Okafor, the superintendent, called James at 4 p.m. to tell him. His voice on that call was considerably less measured than it had been. The previous Monday, there was something in it that I recognized listening from across the room while James held the phone, the particular quality of a man who has just discovered that the situation he was managing cautiously has developed a momentum he did not authorize. The school is going to make a statement, James told me after the call. What kind of statement? The defensive kind. The kind that uses words like investigation underway and zero tolerance, and committed to student safety without specifying any actual action. Will that be enough? For the people calling? James looked at me steadily. No, he said, it won't. Thursday morning, I was in the kitchen at 6:30 a.m. when my phone lit up with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Mercer. My name is Sarah Whitfield. I'm a reporter with the Washington Post. I'm working on a story about a situation at a Northern Virginia private school involving a group of students and a social media campaign. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I want to make sure all perspectives are fairly represented. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I took a photograph of it and sent it to James with no accompanying text. His response came in 40 seconds. Don't respond yet. I'll call you at 7. He called it exactly 7. The Post has been working on this since Tuesday, he said. Sarah Whitfield covers education and juvenile justice. She is thorough and she is fair. She is going to publish regardless of whether we speak to her. How do you know all of this already? A pause. The kind that contains an explanation I was not going to receive. James. I know it, he said simply. The question is whether we want to be part of what she publishes or whether we want to decline and have her tell the story without our perspective. What do you want to do? He was quiet for a moment. I want to talk to Lily first, he said. I went upstairs. Lily was awake. She was always awake before her alarm. Had been since she was small, a quality she had inherited directly from her father. She was sitting on her bed with her laptop open, cross-legged, the specific posture of someone doing homework with the focused intensity of a person who is using work as a form of control over a situation that has otherwise felt uncontrollable. She looked up when I came in. I told her about Sarah Whitfield. I watched her face while I spoke. I have learned over 17 years to read Lily's face the way you learn to read a landscape, well. The small shifts that most people wouldn't register, the particular quality of stillness that means she is thinking hard about something, rather than reacting to it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What does Dad think?" she asked. "He wants to know what you think first." She looked at her laptop screen, then back at me. "If she publishes without us," Lily said, "she tells a story about a victim, a girl something happened to." She paused. "If we talk to her, you tell your own story," I said. Lily was quiet for another moment. "I'm not a victim," she said. Not defensively. Not with the brittleness of someone trying to convince themselves. Just as a statement of fact, clear and steady and entirely believed. "No," I said, "you're not." She looked at me with those gray eyes. "Tell Dad I want to talk to her," she said. I called James. He called Sarah Whitfield. A meeting was arranged for that afternoon at our house with James present, with explicit parameters established in advance about what would and would not be discussed, about the use of Lily's name and image, about the specific claims that could be supported by the documentation we had. Sarah Whitfield arrived at 3 p.m. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s, precise and careful and genuinely, authentically interested in getting the story right rather than getting the story first. She sat at our kitchen table with a recorder and a notebook, and she asked questions with the specific quality of a person who listens to answers rather than waiting to ask the next question. She interviewed me for 45 minutes. Then James for 30. Then, with our explicit permission, with James present throughout, Lily for an hour and 15 minutes. I sat in the living room while Lily's interview happened. I could hear, through the partially open door, the murmur of voices, but not the content. I heard once Lily's voice rise slightly with what sounded like conviction rather than distress. I heard Sarah Whitfield say something that made Lily laugh, a real one. Not the fragile, almost laugh of the weekend, but something fuller, more like herself. When it was over, Sarah Whitfield shook all of our hands. At the door, she paused. "Your daughter," she said to me, with a quality in her voice that was entirely separate from her professional register, "is remarkable." I looked at her. "I know," I said. That evening, while James was back on his phone and Lily was upstairs and the house was quiet, I sat at the kitchen table and let myself feel, for the first time since all of this began, the full weight of what had happened, not the anger, not the strategic focus, not the documentation and the calls, and the meetings and the careful management of information and the performed steadiness of a woman who needed to be the stable point around which everything else moved. There is a particular kind of morning that arrives after a long storm, not the morning when the storm ends. That morning is still too close to the rain, still too saturated with the memory of everything that came before it. I mean the morning that comes several days after. The one where the sky is completely clear and the light has a quality to it that feels almost aggressive in its brightness. And you step outside and the air is cold and clean and every surface that the storm touched is somehow more defined than it was before. More itself. That was the morning the Washington Post published Sarah Whitfield's story. I was awake before the sun. I had been awake for most of the night. Not from anxiety exactly, but from the particular alertness of someone who knows that something significant is about to happen and whose body refuses the diplomacy of sleep. James was beside me, also awake, lying with his eyes open in the dark the way he does when he is running through variables. We didn't speak. We didn't need to dot at 5:47 a.m. My phone lit up. A text from Sarah Whitfield. It's live. Page 1 above. The fold, digital and print. I want you to know I'm proud of this one. I sat up, opened the link, read the headline. A sleeping girl, a senator's son, and the system that looked away. Inside a Northern Virginia school's failure to protect its students. I read the entire piece sitting in the dark of our bedroom while James read it simultaneously on his phone. Beside me, it took 14 minutes. Sarah Whitfield had done exactly what she said she would do. She had gotten the story right. Every fact accurate, every claim supported, every quote precisely what it had been when it was spoken. She had named the school. She had named Braden Cole. He was 18, legally an adult, and she had made the determination, in consultation with her editors, that the public interest justified identification. She had named his father. She had described the schools. Response, the lawyer, the jurisdiction argument, the proposal to interview Lily as a party among parties, with the specific, damning precision of someone who understands that the most devastating thing you can do with institutional failure is simply describe it accurately. She had not named Lily. This had been our explicit condition, and Sarah Whitfield had honored it without question, referring to her throughout as this student, with the consistent, deliberate care of someone who understood exactly what she was protecting. But Lily was in the piece. Her voice was in it, paraphrased, protected, but unmistakably present. The voice of a girl who was not broken, who was not ashamed, who had looked at the reporter across our kitchen table and said, in words that Sarah Whitfield had captured with a precision that made my chest tighten when I read them, they thought, filming me sleeping was going to define me, but I'm going to be a lawyer someday, and I already know more about what they did wrong, legally and morally, than they will ever understand about anything. I read that sentence 3 times, then I put my phone face down on the nightstand and pressed my hands over my eyes and let myself cry for exactly 90 seconds. Not from sadness, not from relief, from something that doesn't have a clean name, the specific, overwhelming confluence of grief for what my daughter had endured and pride in who she was, and the particular, devastating gratitude of a mother who understands. In a moment like this one, exactly how lucky she is. James put his hand over mine on the nightstand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to by 7 a.m. The article had been shared 11,000 times. By 8 a.m., it was the most read piece on the Washington Post's website. By the time Lily came downstairs for breakfast at 7:45, in her school uniform, her hair pulled back, her face carrying the particular composure of someone who has decided what kind of day they are going to have, her phone had 114 notifications from numbers she didn't recognize. She looked at the notification count, looked at me. "It's out," she said. Not a question, "it's out." She was quiet for a moment. Then she set her phone face down on the counter, the same gesture she had made 8 days ago when everything began, but with a completely different quality. 8 days ago, it had been a girl trying to disappear from something. This morning, it was a girl choosing, deliberately and with full awareness, to be present in her own kitchen on her own terms rather than on a stranger's phone. How bad is it? Going to be at school today? She asked. James looked up from his coffee. Different, he said. Not bad. Different. She nodded. Ate her eggs. Asked her father to pass the orange juice. The ordinary morning continued, extraordinary in its ordinariness, while the world outside our house moved with increasing velocity toward a reckoning that none of the people who had earned it were yet fully prepared for. Senator Douglas Cole's office released a statement at 9:15. James showed it to me on his phone. We were sitting in the kitchen after Lily had left for school, after James had driven her in his civilian car, with no ceremony and no visible security, and no indication to anyone observing that this particular father dropping his daughter at Jefferson Preparatory Academy on a Friday morning was anything other than exactly what he appeared to be. The statement was 4 sentences long. Senator Cole is deeply troubled by the allegations outlined in this morning's reporting. He takes matters of student safety and digital responsibility with the utmost seriousness. He has had a candid and difficult conversation with his son about appropriate behavior and the serious consequences of one's actions. Senator Cole believes in accountability and will ensure that Braden cooperates fully with all school and legal processes going forward. I read it twice. A candid and difficult conversation, I said. With his son, James added, he believes in accountability. He will ensure cooperation. I put the phone down on the table. He still thinks this is manageable, I said. He put out 4 sentences. And he thinks this is manageable. He has managed things with 4 sentences for a very long time, James said. It has worked consistently. He has no reason to believe this time is different. Is it different? James looked at me with the specific, measured steadiness that I had seen over 23 years in the moments before something significant and irrevocable happened. Yes, he said, it is. The calls started at 9:30 a.m. Not to us. To the school, Jefferson Preparatory Academy's main line received. According to Richard Okafor, who called James at 10:45 a.m., his voice carrying a quality I had not heard in our previous interactions, something closer to urgency, 100. And 12 calls in the 90 minutes between the article going live and the school's administrative offices opening. By 10:45, when Okafor called, the number was 160-7. Parents, alumni, community members, 3 local news affiliates requesting comment, a producer from a national morning show, a representative from the Virginia Department of Education, which had apparently read the article and was now asking questions about the school's compliance with state reporting requirements for incidents involving minors. The Virginia Department of Education. James had made a call on Tuesday morning, 2 days after his meeting with Gerald Walsh and Patricia Enyo, to someone in the state's education oversight structure. He had provided documentation. He had asked in the quiet, precise way he asked things, for the appropriate parties to be made aware of a potential compliance issue at a private school in Fairfax County involving the non-consensual recording of a minor on school premises. He had not told me he had done this. He told me now, on the phone with Okafor listening on the other end, which meant he was telling me and Okafor simultaneously, which was itself, I understood, intentional. General Mercer, Okafor said when James finished explaining. His voice had shifted again from urgency to something more careful, more considered. I want you to know that the school's initial position, the legal framework that was presented in Monday's meeting, was not something I authorized or endorsed. I know, James said, a pause. I am making changes, Okafor said, effective today. I want you to hear that directly from me. I appreciate that, James said. I would appreciate it more in writing with specifics by end of business today. A longer pause. You'll have it, Okafor said. Gerald Walsh resigned at 2:30 p.m. The school sent a brief communication to parents at 3 p.m., a message that used the phrase pursuing other opportunities and grateful for his service, and contained no reference whatsoever to the circumstances that had made his continued position untenable. The kind of communication that institutions produce when they are trying to move a body quietly out of a room while pretending nothing unusual has happened. Lily was still in school when it happened. She texted me at 3:12 p.m. Walsh was gone. Everyone's talking about it. I just went to cross-country practice like normal. I replied with 3 words. That's my girl. Her response came in 8 seconds, a single emoji. The kind with the face that is trying very hard not to smile and failing completely. The legal process moved faster than I expected and more slowly than I wanted, in the specific contradictory rhythm of systems that are large and complex and built to produce outcomes. Rather than justice, outcomes being a technical category and justice being a moral one, and the two overlapping only when enough pressure is applied from enough directions simultaneously. Fairfax County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office opened an investigation on the following Monday, 11 days after Lily came home broken, 3 days after the Washington Post story ran. James had been in contact with the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office since Wednesday of the prior week, again through channels I didn't inquire about, providing documentation, establishing the factual record. The investigation, when it opened, was therefore not starting from zero. It was beginning with a 47-page file and a clear legal framework and the specific, unambiguous guidance of Virginia statutes regarding the recording and distribution of content involving minors. All 4 boys were interviewed. All 4 sets of parents retained lawyers, expensive ones, the kind that charge by the quarter hour and whose retainers alone represent more money than most families see in a year. Braden Cole's family retained an attorney whose firm had, on 3 separate prior occasions, represented clients with connections to Senator Cole's office. This was reported in a follow-up piece in the Post 6 days after the original story. Sarah Whitfield, it turned out, was not finished. I will not walk through the legal timeline in detail, because legal timelines are long and procedural and full of the specific frustrations of a system that moves on its own schedule, regardless of the urgency of what it contains. What I will tell you is what happened and when and what it meant. Braden Cole was charged. 2 counts, unlawful filming of a minor and criminal distribution of private sexual or intimate images, the latter charge applying because the editing of the content had introduced elements that met the statutory threshold. He was 18. The charges were adult charges. Chase, Donovan, and Tyler, all 17 at the time of the incident, all minors, were referred to the juvenile justice system. Their outcomes were handled separately through a process that is sealed and that I have chosen not to attempt to investigate, because what happens to 17-year-old boys who do what they did is ultimately a matter for the system and their own consciences, and I have deliberately chosen to keep my attention on my daughter rather than on the people who hurt her. Senator Douglas Cole did not survive the quarter. I do not mean this in a dramatic sense. He was not arrested. He was not charged with anything. He is, as far as I know, physically fine, continuing to exist in the comfortable way of men who have resources and connections and the ability to absorb significant political damage without losing the fundamental architecture of their lives. But he lost the committee assignment, the Senate Armed Services Committee, the seat that had been, for 3 terms, the source of much of his influence and the platform from which he had built his reputation as a force in defense policy, was something he no longer held by the end of that political year. The precise mechanism by which this happened was never reported accurately in the press, because the precise mechanism by which such things happen in Washington is rarely visible from the outside. What was reported was simply that he had stepped down from the committee to focus on constituent services, another 4-sentence statement, another exercise in the language of managed exits. James never discussed his role in this with me. Directly, I never asked. Some things between a husband and wife exist in the understood space between what is said and what is known, and this was one of them. What I knew was that a man who had called my husband's office to propose a conversation, man to man and father to father, who had believed, based on 30 years of evidence, that power is a language that can be spoken in any direction, had discovered that there are people in the world who speak it more fluently than he does, and who have no interest in finding common ground. Jefferson Preparatory Academy settled. I am constrained in what I can say about the terms, and I have chosen not to say anything beyond this. The settlement was not symbolic. It was not the kind of institutional gesture that allows an organization to close a file without genuinely reckoning with what the file contains. It included mandatory changes to school policy on digital conduct and reporting obligations for incidents involving student media. It included external oversight of those changes for a period of 3 years. It included, at Lily's specific request, a request she made directly, in a meeting she attended with James and our attorney, with the composure of someone who already knows she is going to law school, a requirement that the school fund an annual assembly on digital consent and student rights, open to the entire student body, delivered by an external organization with expertise in the subject. The first assembly was scheduled for the spring. Lily was invited to help design the curriculum. She said yes immediately. I want to tell you about the day I understood that my daughter was going to be okay. Not the day the article came out, not the day the charges were filed, not the day Gerald Walsh resigned, or the day the settlement was reached, or any of the specific, documentable moments of institutional accountability that I have described. A Tuesday, ordinary, 3 weeks after the Washington Post story. Lily came home from school at the normal time, dropped her bag in the normal place, walked into the kitchen where I was making dinner, and said, while opening the refrigerator and scanning its contents with the specific critical evaluation of a teenager who has decided there is nothing worth eating in a fully stocked kitchen, Ms. Patterson asked me if I'd consider interning at the public defender's office next summer. I looked at her. Double quotes, Miss Patterson from a P government, I said. She has a connection there. She thinks it would be good experience. Lily closed the refrigerator, apparently unsatisfied with its offerings. I think I want to do it. I think I want to see how public defense actually works. Like the mechanics of it. The mechanics of justice, I said. She looked at me, recognized what I was doing, the reference to what she had said at 11 years old, about justice being the most important thing in the world, about someone needing to stand in its defense. She didn't roll her eyes the way teenagers do when parents reference their childhood statements. She just held my gaze for a moment with those gray, steady eyes. Yeah, she said simply, the mechanics of it. She opened a cabinet and found crackers. Began eating them standing at the counter. Mom, she said after a moment. I'm not. She paused, looked at the crackers, then at me. I'm not spending a lot of time thinking about them anymore, like about what they did, about the whole thing. I stopped what I was doing at the stove and gave her my full attention. I thought about them constantly for a while, she said. After, even when I was trying not to, they were there. Like background noise that you can't turn off. She paused again. But lately it's less, like the volume is turning down. That's how it's supposed to work, I said carefully. Is it weird that I almost feel? She stopped. Tell me. She looked at me with the specific vulnerability that Lily allows herself only in the kitchen. And these moments between us that exist outside of the composed, capable self she presents to the rest of the world. Grateful, she said. I almost feel grateful, which is insane, obviously, because what they did was, it's not insane, I said. It made me understand things about how systems work, about what it actually costs when institutions protect themselves instead of the people inside them. About, she paused, about what it means when someone chooses to stand in the way of something wrong, even when they didn't have to. She looked at me when she said this, not at her father, at me. I felt something move through me that I don't have an adequate word for. You're going to be a remarkable lawyer, I said. She almost smiled. The full smile, the Lily smile, the one that takes over her whole face and that I have been collecting since the day she was born. I know, she said. James came home that evening earlier than expected. He came through the front door at 6:30 and changed out of his uniform and sat at the kitchen table and asked what we were having for dinner with the specific, genuine interest of a man who has been eating military catering for 3 days and is prepared to be enthusiastic about almost anything. The three of us ate dinner. We talked about Lily's potential internship and about a book James had been trying to finish for 6 weeks, and about the cross-country meet the following weekend, and about a documentary Lily wanted us to watch after dinner that she described as important but not in a boring way. We watched the documentary, all three of us on the living room couch, Lily in the corner with her feet tucked under her, James in the middle with his reading glasses on the side table that he would never actually put on because he refused to concede that he needed them, me on the other end with a cup of tea, ordinary, completely ordinary. I watched my daughter laugh at something in the documentary, a genuine laugh, unguarded, full, and I thought about the weight she had carried for 3 weeks alone. The weight of being seen in the worst way by people who had not earned the right to see her at all. The weight of shame that was never hers to carry. The weight of silence. She had put it down, not all at once. Not in any single dramatic moment of release. Slowly, over weeks, in the way that heavy things are set down, carefully, with full attention, choosing the right moment on the right ground and the specific, deliberate act of opening your hands and letting go. She had let go, and what was left? After everything that had been done to her and everything that had been built in response to it, and everything that had shifted and crumbled and been held accountable, what was left was exactly who she had always been, Lily. Catherine Mercer, 17 years old, future lawyer, cross-country runner, literary magazine editor, the girl who argues about books with a ferocity that makes her teachers both terrified and secretly delighted. The girl who believes with the specific, uncheckable certainty of someone who has now tested that belief against real resistance and found it intact. That justice is the most important thing in the world. Not a victim, never a victim, a woman becoming I. Want to tell you something before I finish? Something that is not about Braden Cole or Senator Cole or Gerald Walsh or any of the specific named documented failures that I have described in this story. Something that is about none of them and all of them simultaneously. I want to tell you what I learned. I learned that cruelty, when it is practiced by people who have never faced consequences, is not actually strength. It only looks like strength from the outside and only to people who mistake the absence of accountability for the presence of power. Real power, the kind that my husband has spent 34 years earning through service and sacrifice and the daily, unglamorous work of integrity, looks nothing like what Braden Cole demonstrated in that school media room. Real power is what walks quietly into a conference room and says exactly what it means and does not need to raise its voice. I learned that institutions are not inherently on your side. Schools, districts, bureaucratic structures of any kind, they are built to perpetuate themselves, and self-perpetuation is not the same as protection. When an institution calls a lawyer before calling the student it failed, it has told you everything you need to know about its actual priorities. That knowledge is painful. It is also necessary. The people who know it going in are better equipped. For what comes after, I learned that documentation is a form of power accessible to people who do not have any other kind. The 47-page file I built at my kitchen table in the dark hours of that first night, built from screenshots and timestamps and carefully organized evidence and the specific focus fury of a mother who had decided to be useful rather than hysterical, was as important as anything James did through his channels. Maybe more important because it was something I did, something that was mine. I learned that silence in the wrong hands is a weapon, and in the right hands, it is a choice that my daughter was silent for 3 weeks because she was trying to protect the people she loved. That silence was not weakness, it was love badly deployed. When she found her voice again, across the kitchen table from Sarah Whitfield, saying things that ended up on the front page of a national newspaper, she was not speaking for the first time. She was speaking again, returning to herself, reclaiming the territory that had been taken without her consent. I learned that the people who tried to diminish others are, without exception, operating from a position of diminishment themselves. Braden Cole saw my daughter, her confidence, her intelligence, her absolute unwillingness to make herself smaller, and he found her threatening. Not because she threatened him in any real sense, but because she reminded him, in the specific way that genuinely strong people remind insecure ones, of everything he was not and was afraid he would never be. He tried to reduce her. He made her. Instead, extraordinary Dot, and finally, the thing I return to most. In the quiet moments when I am alone in the kitchen in the early morning with my coffee and the particular stillness of a house where everyone I love is sleeping safely, I learn that justice is not a thing that happens automatically. It is not a force that moves through the world on its own, correcting imbalances and holding accountable and protecting the people who most need protecting. It requires human beings to choose it, to stand in its defense, even when that defense is costly, even when the systems that are supposed to deliver it look the other way, even when the easier and safer and more comfortable choice is to accept the institutional answer and go home. Someone has to choose it. Lily chose it at 11 years old, in a statement so simple and so certain that it has stayed with me ever since. She chose it again at 17, sitting across from a reporter in our kitchen, talking about what had been done to her with a clarity and a steadiness that I am not sure I could have matched at twice her age. She will choose it again and again, in courtrooms and conference rooms, and the 10,000 ordinary moments of a life in law, a life she has already decided to build in the service of the thing she has believed in since she was small enough to sit on a kitchen counter and announce her convictions to the world. Justice is the most important thing. Someone has to stand in its defense. My daughter is standing. She has been standing this whole time, and she is only just beginning. I still remember the exact moment my heart cracked open. It wasn't the surgeon's knife or the burning pain in my side. It was the sound of my mother's voice, saying those 5 words like they were nothing. Your brother has a game. My name is Sophia, and up until that night, I believed family was the one thing that would always catch you when you fell. I was 20 in my 2nd year of college, the dependable older sister who helped with homework, cooked dinners when mom was tired, and cheered loudest at every single one of Liam's soccer matches. Liam was 17, talented, charming, the son everyone orbited around. I told myself I didn't mind being in his shadow. After all, that's what big sisters do: support, sacrifice, stay quiet. Then came the evening everything unraveled. I'd been feeling off for days, sharp stabs in my abdomen I brushed off as stress. But that Friday, the pain doubled me over in the kitchen. Dad rushed me to the AO while Mom stayed to finish packing Liam's gear. Tests confirmed it. My appendix had burst. Emergency surgery. As they wheeled me away, I squeezed Dad's hand and whispered, "Tell Mom I love her." He nodded, eyes worried, but I saw him check his watch. I woke in recovery, disoriented, throat raw from the tube, body heavy with meds. The room was quiet except for beeping machines. I looked around for familiar faces, empty chairs, no flowers. No one. My phone sat on the side table silent. I texted Mom, I'm out of surgery. Where are you? Minutes dragged. Then her. Reply, we're at Liam's game, honey. He's starting tonight. Scouts are here. We'll come right after. Rest up. Love you. Love you. Those words felt hollow echoing in the empty room. They had left me fresh from the operating table, still half asleep and scared to watch a high school soccer match. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. The nurse came in, saw my face, and gently wiped them away. Family running late? She asked softly. I could only shake my head. In that moment, the pieces of years of small slights clicked. Together, recitals I performed alone, birthdays overshadowed. Every time I heard Liam's game is more important right now. But what I didn't know then was how deep that wound would cut, or how it would forge something unbreakable inside. Emmy asterisk, here is your complete narration script for the video title. Your brother has a game. They left me broken, my cold revenge. Written in first-person female narration, dramatic and emotional cinematic style. Natural spoken English, focusing on heartbreak, quiet strength, and satisfying justice. Total word count, approximately 1,450, ideal for 7 to 8 minutes at a measured, emotional. Delivery pace, closing parenthesis, hook, beginning. I still remember the exact moment my heart cracked open. It wasn't the surgeon's knife or the burning pain in my side. It was the sound of my mother's voice, saying those 5 words like they were nothing. Your brother has a game. My name is Sophia, and up until that night, I believed family was the one thing that would always catch you when you fell. I was 20 in my second year of college, the dependable older sister who helped with homework, cooked dinners when Mom was tired, and cheered loudest at every single one of Liam's soccer matches. Liam was 17, talented, charming, the son everyone orbited around. I told myself I didn't mind being in his shadow. After all, that's what big sisters do: support, sacrifice, stay quiet. Then came the evening everything unraveled. I'd been feeling off for days, sharp stabs. In my abdomen, I brushed off as stress. But that Friday, the pain doubled me over in the kitchen. Dad rushed me to the AO while Mom stayed to finish packing Liam's gear. Tests confirmed it. My appendix had burst. Emergency surgery. As they wheeled me away, I squeezed Dad's hand and whispered, "Tell Mom I love her." He nodded, eyes worried, but I saw him check his watch. I woke in recovery, disoriented, throat raw from the tube, body heavy with meds. The room was quiet except for beeping machines. I looked around for familiar faces, empty chairs, no flowers. No one. My phone sat on the side table silent. I texted Mom, I'm out of surgery. Where are you? Minutes dragged. Then her. Reply, we're at Liam's game, honey. He's starting tonight. Scouts are here. We'll come right after. Rest up. Love you. Love you. Those words felt hollow echoing in the empty room. They had left me fresh from the operating table, still half asleep and scared to watch a high school soccer match. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. The nurse came in, saw my face, and gently wiped them away. Family running late? She asked softly. I could only shake my head. In that moment, the pieces of years of small slights clicked. Together, recitals I performed alone, birthdays overshadowed. Every time I heard Liam's game is more important right now. But what I didn't know then was how deep that wound would cut, or how it would forge something unbreakable inside me. Word count 462. ID, conflict and betrayal. The hours after that text blurred into the loneliest night of my life. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every time I put myself last. The family photos where I stood at the edge. The way Mom's eyes lit up only for Liam's trophies. Dad's proud stories that never included my straighter report cards. I had convinced myself it was normal siblings compete, parents have favorites sometimes. But lying there alone, incision throbbing, four dripping, the truth settled like ice in my chest. I wasn't just second place. I was optional. Morning came. They arrived around noon, smelling like stadium popcorn and victory. Liam burst in first, still in his jersey, grinning. We won. Scouts talked to me after. Mom hugged me carefully, avoiding my side. We were so worried, sweetie, but you were in good hands. Dad patted my foot. You're tough. You handled it. Handled it. Like I had a choice. I smiled weakly, the way I always had. Inside something died. The nurse who'd sat with me through the night gave me a knowing look as they chattered about the game. When they left to grab coffee, she whispered, "You deserve better than being an afterthought." Her words stuck. Back home, recovery was quiet. I moved slowly, healed physically, but the emotional scar festered. I started noticing everything, how conversations always circled back to Liam, how my college struggles were dismissed with, "You'll figure it out." One evening, I overheard Mom on the phone. "Sophia's fine now. Liam's got that big tournament coming up. We can't miss it." Fine. That word became my enemy. The pain built until one rainy afternoon I broke. I sat in my room, scrolling through old photos, and the tears came hard. Not loud sobs, just silent, shaking grief for the girl who'd spent years trying to earn love that should have been given freely. But in that storm of hurt, anger flickered. Not hot rage, cold, clear resolve. I wasn't going to beg for their attention anymore. I wasn't going to fade into the background. I started small. I focused on my studies, landed an internship, saved every penny. I documented everything quietly, journal entries, voice memos of the hospital night, screenshots of texts. I didn't plan revenge yet. I planned freedom. And slowly, the broken girl began rebuilding herself into someone unbreakable. The shift wasn't dramatic at first. It was quiet, determined, cold. Asterisk Liam's state championship arrived, the game that could define his future. The whole town buzzed. My parents rented a hall for the after party, invited coaches, scouts, neighbors. They asked me to help set up, to smile in photos, to be the supportive sister again. I said yes. But I came prepared. That night, after Liam's team lifted the trophy and cheers echoed, the celebration moved indoors. Music played, people toasted. I waited until the room was full, then stepped to the microphone they'd set up for speeches. My hands were steady. "I'd like to share something," I said softly. The room quieted. I connected my phone to the projector. The screen lit up not with game highlights, but with my face in the hospital bed, pale and alone. My voice from months ago filled the speakers. "They left right after surgery because your brother has a game." Clips followed. Empty chairs, my tear-streaked texts, old family moments where I faded into the background. I narrated calmly. For years, I told myself it didn't matter, until the night I needed them most, and they weren't there. Gasps rippled. Phones came out. Mom froze, hand over her mouth. Dad's face drained of color. Liam stared at the floor. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply showed the truth. The video, which I'd uploaded privately earlier, went public. In that moment, shares started instantly. Comments flooded, strangers calling out the favoritism, others sharing their own pain. The party ended abruptly. Scouts left early, conversations awkward. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread. Sponsors hesitated. Friends distanced themselves. My parents called daily, voices cracking with apologies I didn't rush to accept. Liam texted, "I didn't know it hurt you this much." I replied once, "Now you do." I moved out soon after full. Ride to a university far away. New circle of people who valued me. I changed my number, rebuilt quietly. The video reached hundreds of thousands. It sparked conversations about hidden family wounds. My parents lost the glow they'd built on Liam's success. For the first time, they tasted invisibility. Today, I carry peace, not bitterness, closure. I forgave enough to free myself, but not so much I forgot my worth. If there's a lesson here, it's this. Love should never make you feel optional. When people show you who they are, believe them. And when your heart shatters, use the pieces to build something stronger. Sometimes the coldest revenge isn't destruction, it's choosing to thrive with outcome. You are never too broken to rise, and you never have to stay where you're not seen.